Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
The 2016 presidential campaign saw a sharp divide in the ranks of the Democratic Party, and it's still being played out, even as Democrats appear to be united against the man in the White House. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. There is no doubt that the Democrats are watching with glee as the presidency of Donald Trump hits one speed bump after another. But what is their future? In the 1990s, the New Democrat came onto the scene with the presidency of Bill Clinton that moved away from the more traditional liberal wing of the party. For the 2016 presidential race, a new trend has emerged under what may be described as the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. Indeed, we saw this play out in the battle over the chairmanship of the party, with former Labor Secretary Tom Perez seen as a more established figure, beating out Representative Keith Ellison. Ellison has been brought on as a deputy chair to unite the party. So where do progressives go? What will be their impact? In our studios this morning, we have Professor Michael Laughlin. He's a political science professor at the Salisbury University. Also, Michael Feldman. He's chair of the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus, and Jared Shabline. He is also chair and candidate recruitment and education and training committee member of that as well. And we appreciate you all stopping by and chatting with us here this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
So we of course have the healthcare bill. I guess that got passed in the House, and the Democrats, at least all the Democrats on the floor, seem to be saying that basically that the Republicans are going to be paying for this down the road here in 2018. So, I mean, one of the questions becomes for progressives, and Mike, I'm going to start with you. I've talked to a number of progressives during the campaign, and they were all very disenchanted with Hillary Clinton. Clinton, of course, then ultimately lost. Some of them decided they would vote for third-party candidates or not support Clinton at all. So one of the questions I have is, wouldn't it be better if you were, say, dealing and fighting with Hillary Clinton in the White House over health care, who was a traditional Democrat, as opposed to, say, somebody like Trump? Is there a practical side to progressive politics here?
I think so. I would absolutely agree with you. Working with any Democrat or anyone who shares the vast majority of our values is really going to be more practical than staying at home. But unfortunately, when it comes to Democrats, liberals, and progressives, the difference between them and some other voters is you have to earn their vote. You have to convince them that you are for them. And you have to do that not only in your rhetoric, but also your policies. And I think for a long time, we've seen the Democrats moving away from that a little bit. And that's why you see the lack of enthusiasm, and that's why you see people staying home as opposed to coming out to vote.
What issues do you think resonated with, say, the Bernie Sanders or the progressive folks, and say during the election, that just said, "Oh, I can't cross the line"?
I think the biggest thing for me personally was, once again, it seemed to be a lack of authenticity. It seemed like Hillary Clinton needed to be pushed from $12 an hour to $15. The Wall Street speeches that came out. It's really an idea that the Democratic Party needs to go back to being a party for the working class, and at least the perception is that they are very much controlled to a point by their larger donors, corporate interests, special interests, and things of that nature.
Jared, what about you? What about is politics practical, or is it idealistic?
Progressive politics are practical. It would have been a lot easier to work with Hillary Clinton in the White House. The thing about the whole pitting the progressives against the other wing of the party is just more of a push to distance ourselves. We do have a lot of areas where we could work with a Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump, but as Michael said, she did need to be pushed. Some of the things she said didn't seem authentic. I mean, there was periods in her life, like for example with something like gay marriage, where she was against it and then came forward when you had the Senator Sanders, who has been pushing for it for the last 40 years. So would it have been a lot easier to get a single-payer healthcare system through with a Hillary Clinton? Yes, it would. I would have to say the only silver lining about Donald Trump is people are finally waking up. They're getting involved in the political process. They're beginning to realize, hey, this matters. we need to focus on this. And you're seeing with the Republican health care plan that the people are waking up. They're realizing, hey, they're coming after us. We need to get involved. We need to take a stand. So both arguments have pros and cons to them. What happened happened. Donald Trump is our president, so we have to move forward for that, and that includes working with the other wing of the party to get things done.
Because obviously, I mean, moving beyond just simply the presidential election, I mean, you have a bunch of candidates who are certainly running for the 2018. And I'm reminded of a president who once had constituents, who particularly, I think they were on the left, who said, "We want you to do all these things." And he said, "Oh, this is really great. That's great. Now make me do it." That is that just because somebody's elected doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have the political capital or necessarily the political will to make something happen. That the grassroots and the organizations have to make that happen, as opposed to, say, for instance, having a candidate who's going to be maybe they're inauthentic, but if you can make them do what you want them to do, what's the difference?
Yeah,
I mean,
candidates are more likely to get behind you once all political change happens from the grassroots. Power isn't going to give up power unless it's pushed too. And a lot of people, as Michael said, on our side of politics, and it's not just the progressive, it's the liberals, it's the conservative Democrats. We need to be earned of. We need our votes to be earned. Where on the other side, the Republican voters will normally vote for something just as simple as the Supreme Court nominee. Like, I know conservatives who absolutely could not stand Donald Trump, but voted Republican just for that Supreme Court nomination. So I would say the two wings of the party need to come together, work together. We have common issues and we have areas where we need to work together to work where we can and then disagree where we do. But we can't split the party over this.
Michael, we turn to you. You've been watching politics a long time, probably as long as I have. And you certainly remember the new Democrat that came in, right? The Democratic Leadership Council and so on, which was a shift out from, say, Mondale and sort of the traditional labor special interests, as it were, in terms of education folks and so on. Give us a sense about where do you think we are with the emergence of somebody like Bernie Sanders as part of a movement?
Well, I think, again, it is important to anchor our present situation in the 1980s, with the Reagan victory in 1980, and then again in 84, where Mondale gets just demolished. The elites within the Democratic Party made a strategic decision. They said the money is with the upper middle class and the upper class. We cannot afford, if we're to survive. At that point, the competition was, I mean, people were talking about the emerging Republican majority, that the Republican Party was going to become the majority party in the country, the Democrats were going to become the small minority. That was really the kind of angst that was going on. So you had the elite within the Democratic Party deciding, we got to go, we got to finance our party, and they made a strategic shift away from the Jesse Jackson wing. That was really the working class, traditional direction of the New Deal, Roosevelt kind of orientation, to a Republican light perspective. And what's ironic, of course, is that it was Bill Clinton who helped set that course. And Bill Clinton lays the foundation for Hillary Clinton's loss. Because what we have is Hillary Clinton has been on the same track, essentially the corporate liberal, going after the same money that the Republicans have been going after, and the orientation changed from really attending to the interests and the needs of the working class, which of course is both white and African American and Latino American, and that's what leads partly to her loss. The challenge for progressives now is to can you really change the Democratic Party to go back to its roots, and so the clash. I mean, I think the real tension between the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren wing, which I think is a resurrection, in effect, of the New Deal orientation, working class orientation, and essentially the Clinton and the Schumer, and even some rising stars like New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, if you look at his politics, on the one hand, they're quite progressive on all kind of social issues, but he is genuinely a corporate liberal. When push comes to shove, he's very friendly with those interests. And in order for the progressive policies to be addressed, like single payer, right, $15 an hour wage, there's going to have to be. That is going to be difficult. That's going to be the difficult dynamic to engage.
So what do you make of the fact that we had the former Labor Secretary Tom Perez, who obviously won the chairmanship, but he's brought on obviously Keith Ellison, who seemed to be the more progressive of the two. Is that marriage going to work?
Time will tell, because part of it, clearly, I think at this point, the progressives have an opening that they did not have previously. Which, it's ironic in one sense, because I do sympathize with my colleagues who just spoke with regard to Hillary Clinton. Would she have been better to work with than Donald Trump? No question about it. And on the other hand, the Trump victory is the shining exhibit A of corporate of a corporate win, and so the progressives now have an option to really change the dynamic here. With regards for healthcare, for example, Democrats do have an opening here. What do they sell to those constituencies that they think can be addressed now, that may be vulnerable in these Republican districts? Do they simply sell, just let's repair Obamacare? Or do they try to sell, this is the opportunity to get rid of all all these conditions and like pre-existing conditions, let's just have single payer. Single payer eliminates the whole question, the whole debate over pre-existing conditions. The only pre-existing condition you need is to be a citizen. Yeah, so that kind of stark clarity, I think, of issues now is an option for progressives. But who knows? Because you have just one other real quick observation on that point. Conyers, of course, in the House of Representatives, has offered such a bill, and apparently there are some 104 signatures. So there are already 104 members of the House of Representatives willing to stick their necks out for a single payer. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, said he was going to offer, right, but he now is not going to float a bill, right? Ralph Nader, which I consider one of the more important progressives we have in this country, is now criticizing Sanders and saying, why not, Bernie? What are you doing? Why are you holding back? Why is he holding back? He doesn't want to divide the Democratic Party. What that means is that the tilt back towards the so-called moderate, which I would call the corporate liberal segment, really is getting Bernie to come over to their side for the present time, right? So that's the tussle.
Well, Michael, so what about that? This idea that Sanders, as you just mentioned ago, on certain issues, but this particular issue, has decided, well, maybe not. Now he's an elected official, so he's been involved with politics. I don't know exactly what might make him do that in his own state, but nonetheless, it seems as if there's this fractionalization. Because one of the things, by the way, that apparently Sanders was not a big fan of Ossoff in the Georgia runoff election, or the general election before they go to the runoff, and somebody said, "Well, yeah, this is crazy. What are we getting? Are progressives and Democrats getting a little too, how many angels on the head of a pin kind of thing? Are we getting? What sense do you get about that?
I would definitely say that some issues are more important than others. As far as the hesitation to John Ossoff, I think this is a lot more than just about Bernie Sanders or particular politicians in the House or the Senate. This is really about everybody that identifies as progressive or thinks that healthcare should be a human right, all coming together and, like you said, pushing our legislators to act, especially because some of our legislators who are already on board with this type of legislation but may not have dropped something themselves, a la Bernie Sanders, really need that grassroots support to be able to embolden them to do things like pushing for single payer.
Now, as a progressive caucus, you're trying to reach out to voters, and one of the big at least conventional pieces of wisdom out of the election was that Democrats have not been able to persuade white working class voters to vote Democratic. They decided to vote for Trump instead, as an example. How, particularly somebody who's out there trying to recruit people to your cause, particularly in an area like this, very conservative, but still a working class. What is that approach that you're trying to take?
Really, the best success I think that we've had with that so far is I think that people always assume that progressives and liberals and Democrats, conservatives, pretty much everyone have such differing ideology. But I'll tell you, with the vast majority of the conservatives that I've talked to, while we may disagree on social policy and certain social issues, I think a lot of people would be very surprised how much we agree on economic policy, tax reform, making sure that the upper or the billionaire class pays their fair share in taxes. I mean, when you look at the state of our infrastructure, the state of our healthcare, and all these other social issues that we may disagree on, the overarching commonality that you'll see between them is that generally it is the working class in general, white or not, versus the billionaire or the corporate class.
So what do you think appealed to these voters when it came to Donald Trump?
I mean, I think you saw it in this last election, especially with all the voters that voted for Obama and then voted for Trump. They voted for Obama back because they wanted to see change. And I think that he was a very charismatic individual, and he was very good at selling that dream. But for a lot of people, even after we came out of the recession in 2008, a lot of people still haven't come out of that themselves. The economy has as a whole, but a lot of people are stuck in that mode of still living paycheck to paycheck. And I think what you're seeing now is a coalescing of those people together around these particular issues. And I think that that is not a divide between liberal or conservative. That's something that I think that the 99% is really can get behind.
I mean, is there any particular issue or set of issues that you try to reach out to somebody who might be a conservative here on the shore?
I mean, really, the main thing that I'll normally use, like I said, is either tax or economic policy, specifically getting the rich to pay their fair share, or the corruption that we see in our politics, all of the dark money that we see in our politics. One of the reasons that candidates have such a hard time, and one of the things that we're going to need to work on moving forward is funding these candidates, because we are not yet at a point where you have public financing of elections. And I can tell you, after starting to look into exactly how campaigns work and the kind of money that is needed to run them, I mean, that's a huge barrier for anyone that doesn't have the time off to, or the funds to take off from their job for the next 18 months.
So, Jared, is there a way to overcome the money? I mean, I remember there was in fact, one of the election campaigns, and a number of campaigns actually here on the congressional level, I remember television ads being run. It would now, obviously, it's not an expensive market, but nonetheless, they cost money. And brochures and mailers and so on and so forth, that those seem to have an effect. How do you put that in relationship to what the kind of resources you have and the kind of organizing you think you need to do?
Your question's more along of the caucus standpoint.
Yeah.
So basically what the caucus is trying to do is we're reaching out to the candidates, working with them, to be with them along every step of the way. We've worked with bigger progressive groups like Revolution, Progressive Maryland, and other groups from around the state and area about helping to bring people in, to get them the resources, to get them the volunteers, whether that be donors, phone bankers, door knockers. And can I touch on your last point a little bit
Sure.
on the Democrats not appealing to the white working class? Well, under the corporate wing of the party, we really didn't have anything to say to the white working class. I mean, the Democrats didn't go in and try and talk to them. You can't win over a group of people that you don't even put any effort into. And what brings up progressive politics is whether you be Latino, African American, white working class, if you're in the working class, these economic issues like a livable wage, access to health care, access to education, economic, environmental, and social justice, that's something that a lot of us agree on. That's whether you're conservative, liberal, moderate, whatever you want to call yourself, that we all agree on. So the progressive politics can get everyone on one side of the table, and that's why you see Bernie Sanders getting disgruntled Republicans, getting a large block of independents, getting the Democrats to his party. And what we would like to do on that here in the caucus is same thing, get everyone on one side of the table and appeal to them. Like we believe that everyone should have access to education. We believe that people should have access to health care. We believe people should have a living wage, and that's something a lot of people agree on. So from the standpoint of getting what we need to run state elections is to work with other groups, to go to these people and say, this is what our platform is. This is why you should get behind it. So if you can donate the time, the money, get behind us, and we can work for you. The progressive wing isn't just because we've stemmed out the New Deal Democrats, the ones who got America out of the Great Depression, is people are going to start to realize the progressive movement is on your side. It's been on your side. So I feel like that's why we can get other groups and the resources needed, because if you look at the presidential election, Clinton struggled to get grassroots donors. Why? Because she doesn't represent grassroots donors. When you look at Senator Sanders' campaign, who represented the working class, look how much grassroots donation he got. It was the soul blood of his entire campaign, making $27 an hour. So if you represent the people will take care of your fundraising. They will call for you. They will knock doors for you. And that's what it's all about, and that's what the Democratic Party needs to get back to, representing the working class. We've lost 1,000 seats in 8 years. The Republicans control state majorities, House majorities, Senate majority, President, Supreme Court. The Democratic Party needs to understand that the same old politics that worked under Clinton isn't going to work anymore. People have woken up. People want to be represented again, and people want change. So if we go back to that, we won't have problems with getting donors. We won't have problems with getting volunteers. We won't have problems in winning a lot of these races that we've lost.
Michael Philpin?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it boils down to. When you talk about how to get the funding to pay for all these races, we talk about this issue with money in politics all the time. And I think one thing that we as progressives have been grappling with is, at the end of the day, if you believe in these candidates and you want them to win, we do have to fight back against that money. And we do also have to do that by donating to campaigns. I mean, for example, we do already have a couple candidates that we're looking at for smaller offices, school board, Democratic Central Committee, things like that. But we've actually also already had a progressive candidate for the 1st District against Andy Harris, Allison Galbraith, that just filed her candidacy a few weeks ago. And one of the things that we're going to have to do moving forward is spending that time, that energy, and that money in order to help pay for these things, because there are approximately 200,000 doors that our congressional candidate would have to knock in order to flip the voters that she needs to flip. We all know that that's physically impossible, so there has to be the funding there to hire the staff to get this done.
Michael, I'm going to turn to you for a moment, because we've been talking about the white working class. Was one of the mistakes made, maybe it was tone as opposed to anything else, that there was a lot of effort to get out the Hispanic vote, a lot of effort to get out the African American vote, Asian vote, lots of folks named those kinds of things, and at least conventional wisdom says not enough effort to get out the white working class vote. What role is race playing in all of this? I mean, is it that Democrats made a mistake, or is it some natural outgrowth from obviously what the Republicans have done over the years in terms of wooing certainly the white vote?
I think it seems to me it's undeniable that racism and the racial divide continues to plague our politics. So that while it's the challenge for progressives is to talk to white working class voters and tell them and help explore the reality that their interest is the same interest as the African American working class and Latino working class. There remains, I think, clearly a prejudice against the immigrant, against African Americans from the white working class. So that remains. I mean, Trump wins because he appeals not only to the plight of the working class to raise them. I mean, he gives them all false promises, but he appeals to the prejudices too, to the bigotry, to the racism, and that has a continuing reality. And so I think that remains the challenge. I mean, so. And that's a difficult problem. I mean, it's taken some generations, as Obama has explained. We've made a lot of progress, but we have more progress to make. The younger generation, I mean, I think here's where perhaps the millennial generation, your generation, has a much greater chance, I think, at breaking that knot, at resolving that issue. I think our generation, even though we come from the '60s, where we were supposed to have put aside all of that, particularly for the working class, for white working class, I think that remains an issue. Because this was an issue we have to remember in the labor movement all the way in the early part of the 20th century, up through the 30s and 40s. That the racial divide clearly was there as well.
As a matter of fact, when I look back at least the baby boom kind of occupancy of the White House, I see certainly Bill Clinton, who represented certainly the more liberal dimension of the 1960s, but then I also see George W. Bush, who really represents the conservative side of that same generation. Well, Michael Feldman, I want to turn to you. What about your generation? I mean, do you see changes occurring? Do you think that's from what you're experiencing, what you're reading, that they are as conservative as, say, for instance, the baby boom generation was, for example? I mean, what are there opportunities there for you, or?
I mean, I would say that the younger generation as a whole happens to be pretty progressive. I think it was about 75% of people under the age of 35 voted for Senator Sanders. So those more progressive ideals, I think, are a lot more popular than a lot of people are giving them credit for. I mean, if you look at the polling for single payer, if you look at the polling for free college tuition for all, if you look at these ideas, it sounds like something that would be such a radical idea, as Senator Sanders often likes to say, but the approval ratings are above 50% and well above 50% in almost all of those polls. So I think that we need to bridge the gap between this idea that these ideas are radical and they can't work in this country and we can't pay for them, and begin to understand that this is what the vast majority of the American people want. And once we get to that, then we as the American people need to show, and as you mentioned earlier, push our legislators or empower our legislators to pass that legislation or hold them accountable in 2018.
What about you, Jared? How do you read your generation?
A lot of what Michael's saying, my generation, and I'm glad to see this, a lot of my generation, from learning from like the 60s and the older generations of civil rights, if you ask someone in my generation, like, what do you think about gay marriage? They're going to be like, it doesn't matter. If someone is LGBT, they should have every rights as me. We don't focus on skin color, gender, or sexual orientation. Like, we're a lot more tolerant generation. And we definitely, and as a whole, of course, you do have small minorities of our generation who still have those racist views, but the majority is a lot more tolerant. And as Michael said, my generation is very to the left with Senator Sanders, because Senator Sanders has you can look at anything he said over the last 40 years and it'd be the exact same thing he's saying now. When you listen to Senator Sanders or a lot of the progressives speak, you know that they're on your side. And that was one of the problems with Hillary Clinton appealing to my generation. During one of the debates, she was like, well, I'm not for tuition-free college. And then she comes on and goes and supports it, which is great, but people still remember you weren't originally with us. You weren't originally with the LGBT community. You had to be pushed. This is something that you shouldn't have to be pushed. You shouldn't have to be told that gay marriage is okay, from my generation's standpoint, and of course that differs. To discuss about the baby boomer ideology, and a lot of what the Republicans have done is instill fear in people. The immigrants are taking your jobs. They're pitting each other. They're doing divide and conquer. They're pitting us against each other, which is exactly how they take power. That's exactly why you see the wealthy not paying their fair share in taxes, because it's a lot easier for me as a billionaire to get away with not paying taxes if I'm pitting you against you and you against me and you against each other. So what we need to do is break the narrative and explain to people the immigrant community is not taking your job. And if a lot of the jobs immigrants are taking, a lot of Americans don't work. We saw a piece about the Kentucky Derby, how he said, I'm struggling to find Americans to work these jobs. And the issue brought forth with immigration taking jobs is they're not coming here and stealing jobs. Employers are hiring them because they can pay them less.
And we're running out of time here, so we're going to re-identify everything. Actually a good place to stop because that's where we began. We, of course, have Mike Feldman. He's chair of the Lower Shore Progressive Caucus. Also, Jared Sublime. He's chair of Candidate Recruitment Education and Training Committee, as well as, of course, Professor Michael Laughlin, political science professor here at Salisbury University. Appreciate you all stopping by and having this chat this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. For the Delmarva Today schedule, visit pac14.org or view the latest issue of the Daily Times.